So, fun things about inclusive hiring. When we talk about inclusivity in HR, a lot of times we start with, we need a more diverse candidate pool. And then that's as far as anybody goes. Like, look, we got diversity in our candidate pool. Great, that doesn't cut it. We really need to rethink how we're hiring as a whole in order to generate a process that, A, gets you what you want out of your hiring process, and then also gets whatever kind of diversity you're looking for. The other thing that's true about that candidate pool diversity is we tend to think about that exclusively in terms of color or gender. Look, we have a rainbow of colors in our candidate pool. We did it. Look, we have multiple genders in our candidate pool. We did it. But you really want to think about what is the type of diversity of thought, what is the type of background you're looking for, what is the actual things that your business needs in order to hire a person into your organization that does whatever it is you need. Next slide, please. So, who am I? My name is Jessi. My company is called Outgrow Your Garage, and we do business operations. So our goal is, how do we get more businesses through that first stage of learning where they know a lot about what their business does, not a lot about running a business, and how do we build good and effective processes. One of my big things is that I am really into the link between workers' rights and employer responsibility. So as employers, the way that workers get rights and have better working conditions is we build those into our process. And there are two ways to build workers' rights into your company. One is all of your employees go on strike and they demand them, and it gets really hard, and then you grant those rights. I like to say those are the ones that are written in blood. That's why we have weekends and an 8-hour workday and minimum wage. Those things were written in blood. But as an employer, you can decide the other option of, I'm going to create a workplace that people want to be in and a place that employees want to stay at, and we're going to start that in the hiring process. So you can do that. Hiring is, in my world, a form of activism. You build that process. It is something that you decide, this is how we're going to do it. That's why people start companies, because they like control. You can attract candidates who believe in your mission. What is the thing that you do? And how can you bring more people into that? You want people who are bought into what you do, because those are the people who are going to be able to talk about what you do in a way that is successful, right? You don't want to be the Amazon of the world that says, well, I work for Amazon and they pay the bills, but the warehouse sucks, right? You don't want that. Click the button. One of the things that I really like about hiring is that you can prove that business success doesn't depend on worker exploitation, right? We live in a capitalist society in which workers really are producing a lot of the value of companies. And a lot of companies are like, great, I'm going to treat you like a cog in the wheel. We're going to get a lot of profit. They'll end. We don't have to do that. Next. And then you can't change the system. It's a really big system, but you can change your little corner. One of the things I like to say a lot about how hiring operates is it's your way to prove that you can do things differently. And it does not mean that the business goes under. And there are a lot of different ways to do that depending on your industry. So let's talk about how that operates. We only have 2 people, so we will just ask the survey questions. I was going to set a new thing, but there's only 2 of them. So 3 of you, so it doesn't matter. So who owns a business? Who works in a business? Or nonprofits count too. Or who is an employee? Let's go with that. Who is running a business? Who works in HR? Are you the new HR person for RMFI? What do you do?
Yeah, I'm the operations manager. I've been there for like 2 years.
Excellent. Nice to meet you. And what do you do?
I'm actually a community outreach person, so I'm not in HR, and I actually don't have any employees, but I am trying to influence the culture of the organization.
Cool. Yeah, culture starts in hiring. Trina, what about you?
Yeah, I'm an employee of a business.
Cool.
I do a lot of different things, bookkeeping and graphics and primarily.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, next slide. So why do hiring processes matter? So the first thing is that if you know what you're trying to do, it is a lot easier to get there. There is a Toby Keith song that says, if you don't know where you're going, you're going to end up somewhere else. And he's talking about getting lost on the way to the bar, but it's true in all situations, right? If you don't know where you're going, you're going to end up somewhere random. If you have clear expectations, you have a better process, right? Where you're trying to get to, how are you going to get there? What does everybody need to know? Hiring for retention. If you have a good hiring process and you follow the things we're going to talk about in this workshop, then you get better staff. They stay. And culture starts before you hire. We're going to talk about how processes get made. You make a plan of what you need, how you're going to get there, what the limiting criteria are. We're going to talk about how you build a job description and evaluate it. We're going to talk about how you interview, making an offer, and how you prep people for the first day. What do we got? What are your current questions or concerns around how inclusivity, DEI goals, and all of that incorporate into your hiring process?
Mine is really around how you cast the net more widely outside of your typical networks. And if you want to do something different, you have to do something different.
Yeah. One of the things, and then we'll talk about a little bit later in this slide, that I think people forget is that your employees have connections all over the community in all kinds of different places. And so make sure your current staff knows what you're hiring for and the type of person you're looking for, right? So like solicit that. And that really helps with building out the community of the people who are good. And then as you bring in some of that diversity, it builds on itself. So that's certainly one thing that is extremely true, because your existing staff is going to be involved in all kinds of different things, whether that's their Saturday afternoon Scrabble club at the library, or the local Dungeons and Dragons group, or the PTA, or whatever. There's all these different ways that your staff is involved in communities. So that's a good one. And then beyond that, it really depends on your industry and kind of how those different things operate. One of the things I advocate for entry-level positions, a good way to generate quick diversity in your entry-level positions, is to talk to community colleges, graduating seniors at high schools, and your undergraduates, right? And so those three places, you hit a pretty broad net of people in different walks and stages of life. So really being intentional about that, but it's a really tough thing in terms of that casting your net, partly because it's really easy to tokenize.
And it feels like we get more of the same because people are tapping their own networks. But when I think about some of the diversity we have accomplished, it actually did come from employee referrals, and they were more likely to stay because they had a connection within the organization. So it's small incremental change, but it was lasting.
Right. And that's more important.
Maybe that's better than actually dropping yourself into a completely different community to try and recruit, and then they have no connection really to the organization.
It is. And so small lasting change is gonna be more effective than this big immediate change. Because what you don't want to do, and what a lot of organizations will do, is they get this big hiring net, they hire a bunch of people, they don't have any internal supports for that diversity on the back end. And so then they quit after 6 months, right? So really being intentional about it, not just in hiring, but across the board, because once you get that wider net, you want all of your back-end systems to support that within it. We're going to make a plan. So before you hire, you need to know what you're hiring for. And this is one of those things that sounds really trite, but the number of job descriptions that do not match what the expectations at the job are is insane. When do you need people to start? What do you need your budget to be? You can kind of like put all of those up. Perfect. So what are you hiring for? Does everyone involved in that process agree on what you're hiring for? Particularly the bigger the organization, the more this becomes a problem. So the direct supervisor of that position, the team that they're going to be on, the person who is doing the hiring, and potentially the CEO, department head, whoever, like the big wig of that, I think they all need to agree on what that job description is and what the evaluation criteria is for that position. And if they do not agree, you are setting that new hire up for failure. And this is why a lot of people, when you get that wider net, they don't stay, because here is one set of expectations that the direct supervisor has. Here is what was presented in the hiring process. They don't match. And then those new staff get mad and leave. The other thing that's true is, like, you need to be really clear on what your budget is. Budgets are real. And not just what the budget is, but where in the negotiation space do you have room to wiggle? Where don't you have room? Does the budget match what it should be? Right? So when you look at other people in that field or in similar positions, how do they pay? Is it salary? Is it hourly? How do they account for living expenses or commuting or benefits or work from home considerations? All of those different pieces. Look at what the industry is doing. Look at whether or not you can do better. A lot of industries are lousy, particularly RMFI as a nonprofit. We all know that the nonprofit world is super lousy at, like, pay and benefits, but you can't pay your rent and compassion. So if you can do better than that, do that. And again, make sure everybody agrees. I cannot stress that one out. You take one thing away from this presentation, make sure that the manager and the job description and the hiring person all agree on what you're actually hiring for. So in the worksheet that you opened up, what position are you hiring for next, and who should be involved in that? And take a second to write that down. In your case with Alpine Bank, you can kind of pick a spot in the bank. Cool. Let's talk about the job description and evaluation criteria. So when you think about that job description, that's it. We'll go there. I'll think about that. The things that are the biggest tripping points when people write a job description is being really intentional about if this is an entry, a mid, or a senior level position, right? How much knowledge do you want this person to come in with? How much are you willing to train? Everybody, right now it's really trendy. Everybody wants to hire senior level people who need zero training because they don't want to incorporate any professional development or upward mobility into their organization. That's how you make sure that your organization is not set up for long-term success, because those people will all retire and move on in the next 5 to 10 years. And then you won't have anybody you've grown to replace them. So you want to be hiring in general at all of those levels and being intentional about who will manage them. And also, is that person prepared to manage them? Right? Was that person involved in the process? Were they involved in writing the job description? Are they handling other managees? Do they need any support in how to manage? Right? So being really intentional about those kinds of things. And then also, what do you need this person to do? Like, absolutely unequivocally, we cannot hire you unless you can do these things. And what would it be really neat if this person could do? What is really convenient? This would be really helpful. Our organization could really use this skill or that skill. We want it, but it is not mandatory for this position. So being really intentional, and then you split that in your job description of job requirements are those things. If you do not meet these requirements, we cannot hire you. As a bonus, if you could do some number of these other things, that would be great. So you can split that out and being realistic about what those things are and whether or not a single person can meet all of those, right? There's several running jokes online about how we'd really like somebody with 10 years of experience in this programming language that has only existed for 5. No one's going to meet that. So really being intentional around that. Is this an entry-level position where you're requiring 3 to 5 years of experience? If you're requiring 3 to 5 years of experience, it is not an entry-level position. So those types of things. Other stuff you want to think about. Where does this person fit into the overall organizational structure? Where do they fit into the overall culture? So in your case, that should be something that Alpine Bank as a whole is thinking about, of like, when we hire new people, what are we doing to integrate them into our culture? What are our cultural values that really we want everybody to come in with, we want to espouse? Our MFI is actually pretty good at that already. What is the pay structure? What are the benefits? What are some non-traditional benefits that you can offer? Do you have flexible scheduling for childcare or other caregiving needs? Do you have the ability to work from home or come into the office and people get to choose their own schedule on that? Could somebody work from another country if they wanted to go on vacation to like Australia for a month worth of long travel time? Is that something you could accommodate? Could somebody take a long vacation and work for part of that and do stuff, those kinds of things? Who are your internal stakeholders? Who cares about this position? Particularly existing people on that team. How does that person need to integrate with those existing people on the team? And the other thing with that is what I like to call the is someone else an asshole metric, right? So if you have someone on a team or someone who that person is going to interact with who's kind of abrasive, are you hiring somebody who's going to be able to handle that? Particularly if you have somebody who might be on their way out, you're either like waiting for them to retire, you're waiting until you can fire them, they're a contractor, you haven't found another contractor to replace them. Are you setting this new person up for success within that position? I've seen a lot of people where you have somebody on a team, everybody else consistently has issues with them, and then the hiring manager expects this new person to come in and magically be the solution to internal team conflict. That's not going to work. Back on remote work considerations. So if you are remotely working, how are you looking at those equitable pay across geographic regions? So like if I work across the state, what does equitable pay look like for staff who's working in Denver, where the cost of living is extremely high, versus the cost of living in the San Luis Valley, which is one of the most economically distressed areas in the state? What does equitable pay look like? And there are a lot of different ways to do that. So really, but having that conversation about what makes sense for your organization is a good place to start. Acknowledging that it's a thing is a good way to start there. Carry forth. So when you think about it, in the form that you downloaded, there's 8 of these little bullet points, and they're all on that form that you have. So they're just there. So on that little form you have, you can describe the ideal position. What's the ideal person for a position at your company? And what are these priorities, right? And in that Google form, you can drag and drop or number them. But are you looking for somebody with prior experience in a similar position, prior experience in your industry, in a different industry, related experience in a different industry? Do they have experience or skill that's currently lacking? Are they a really great culture fit? Does their personality fit with your existing team? Does the team leader supervisor want to work with that person? If the answer is no, you want your team leader supervisor to be really jazzed about this new hire. Are they enthusiastic about the company mission or goals? These things will all factor into your hiring evaluation criteria, but different positions will have a different order.
I'm curious if you have any recommendations or suggestions on how to ask questions that you could see if they're a good culture fit or if the personality fits with the team.
That comes in the next section, interviewing.
Okay. So you can
yes is the answer. I have so many opinions. With interviewing, the first interview is to determine, can they do the essential duties of this position? Are they in the top 30% or 50% or whatever you decide is the number you want to move on to the next round, right? Can they do the job? Will they maybe fit into our culture? Right. So your interview questions should be structured around, tell me how you did this thing that is related to this job, right? So those questions are largely going to be, what do you think about our culture? And have you read our mission? And, do we generally think that this person is able to do the job? They might fit into our culture. The second interview is for, do we actually want to work with them? Do they actually want to work with us? So you're really narrowing that pool down. And I personally am a huge advocate of paid second interviews, especially ones that allow you to see how that person works. Will they fit into your culture? And then the other thing that is really helpful in terms of equitable hiring in general is having some of those interview times available outside of regular business hours.
Or even just getting out of your office and going for a walk around the block or taking them on a tour of the plant. It's
right.
amazing how people open up.
Any of those, right.
Way. Yeah.
Any of those kinds of things. But particularly in terms of timing of interviews, a lot of times when people set up interviews, they say we're going to have interviews that match the hours of this job because we want people who are available within the hours of that job. Sure, they might be available within the hours of that job when you give them that job, but in the meantime, they may not have a job that they can take time off to go to an interview. So being cognizant about having some times available where if somebody is looking, especially if you're looking at getting candidates who are moving industries or moving out of different spaces, or you might be hiring people who have shift work, and being cognizant of not requiring people to take time off to come to an unpaid interview. When you think about that, as you think about that process, make sure you're giving an interview to anybody who has been recommended by your current staff. Even if that current staff is not a person you love, that doesn't mean they don't have a good recommendation. But also, if you aren't giving interviews to people recommended by your current staff is going to get resentful pretty quick. I'm handing these things, I'm trying to help, I'm trying to support this vision, and they just don't appreciate it at all. So that's a really good thing on that. And then people move fields a lot. That's a pretty common thing right now. They move industries. So does your interview process, do your interview questions account for that? When you think about how to talk to people, what are the things that you really want to know? If what you want to know is how does somebody handle diverse priorities? Restaurant managers can answer that question. Anybody who's ever run a childcare center can answer that question. So they may not necessarily be having experience within that industry, but totally qualified for your role. Next, interview questions. My favorite, hands down, interview question that I've ever asked is, what do you think you're interviewing for? What do you think this job does? And it tells you, one, whether or not they read the job description. But it also tells you what they value about the job description. It tells you what they like, tells you what stuck out to them. Here is a situation that happens a lot in this position. How would you handle it? This job involves a lot of doing this thing that is really repetitive and boring, or this thing that is kind of a pain. How do you handle this thing that is kind of a pain? This job involves a lot of traveling. What are some things that you do to keep yourself motivated or connected to your community or whatever when you are on the road 3 weeks out of the year? What work environments do you like? What is your ideal work environment? Who is your ideal work partner? Who do you like working with? These kinds of open-ended questions are going to give you answers to your evaluation criteria without leading them into it. So in that case of how do you find out whether or not you're a culture fit, or how do you find out whether or not somebody is a good culture fit? If you say, what's your ideal work environment? And they describe something that sounds like your organization, great, they're probably going to be a good culture fit. They describe something wildly different, they're probably not going to be a culture fit. So think about those kinds of pieces. Plan your interview. Look at that priority list that we ordered, right, on your form. What are some questions you can ask that give you the answers to the things that are important there? So if you are prioritizing the personality fits well with the existing team, an interview question might ask about, how do you like to be communicated with? What's your ideal communication style? Is this working to think about how you would overall apply it to culture as a whole? Because in your case, some of that would be that back end work of within a hiring team, how do you get them to do this?
Yeah, I am actually working on an apprenticeship program. So we are actually having to think about, hiring what people used to call a teller, entry level job. What are those skills you're looking for? And how do you solve for that?
Yeah. And so in that case, one of the things that I would include is like, how do you like to learn?
Yeah, it's funny, the things that I listed are all soft skills. We can teach a lot of the hard skills. And how do you know if somebody actually likes people? If they're dependable, if they're accurate. But those behavioral questions. Tell me about a time you had a difficult customer and how you made that work. Those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Would get to that.
And when you're hiring those entry level staff, really looking at what are experiences they would have had.
Yeah.
And so it may not be, tell me about a time you've dealt with a difficult customer. It might be, tell me about a time you've had a conflict with a person in your life. And how you handle that and what your conflict resolution skills. We've all had that teacher in high school that we didn't like. How'd you get through that class and still get your work done? You know? So those kinds of pieces of like, how do you still be nice to people? So particularly on the age that you're working with, if you're working with people under 25, a lot of times they'll still have had these kinds of experiences that may not be job experience, but they've had a life experience.
Now we're asking them about any volunteer things that they've done.
Yeah.
Understanding what they value, how they want to spend their time. That
Yeah.
tells you a lot about what
Yeah.
they're passionate about.
Yep. In a teacher, former manager, person you worked with on an event, what did you really like about having tasks delegated to you, or how you are given when you're given instructions? What really works for you? Right. Just thinking about kind of those things. We tend to not think as much about entry level positions where we tend to be very stuck on this person has no job experience and I have to train them everything. But we forget that they actually did go through 12 years of school where they had this very regimented thing. They had, you have to do this and you have to do this and you have to do this and you have to fit within the system. And we all know what that system is like generally. So asking them how they handle that. Not everybody will have gone through high school. Not everybody will have gone through high school in the US. But you can ask some questions about how your teachers were and what worked well. And that's good entry level space. Next. One of the things that I really believe in is that unless your job requires people to do high pressure thinking on the spot without resources, there is no reason you can't email them with questions in advance. Let them practice. Let them have time to think about it. You will get more thoughtful answers. So yeah, the other thing that's true, and something that a lot of times you call people and you say, hey, we really want to offer you this position. I'm going to email you this thing later. Don't call them until you have the stuff written. I am emailing you right now. Here is the information. And you can leave that in a voicemail. Here's the information. Look through it. Call me with questions. Most of that can be done in advance, right? You're going to fill in the start date after you talk to the person. The initial conversation might be within a range. You're kind of like picking a spot in that. You might be going back and forth a little bit. But basically everything else you should know way back in that planning process. Particularly for benefits, right? So at a larger organization where you have somebody who is putting together a benefits package, they're putting together that information, they should start that when you start that process of looking for a job. So that's all ready to go. Cool. Because yeah, you want to make sure that if the person who's in charge of that hiring process, or the person in charge of putting that benefits package, or the HR person in charge of signing that offer letter, goes on vacation, goes out sick, whatever, you do not have to wait until they come back to get this person onboarded. So anything you can do in advance, do it in advance. Once you have hired somebody, once you have asked them those questions, you have found the ideal candidate. They're great. What now? How do you support them? Before they show up on the first day, you want to make sure that you know what do they need to fill out? What does the supervisor need to set up? What equipment do they need? What are the things that you need to have together so that when they show up on the first day, you can just get rolling? You want to set up meetings with the people that they need to talk to, right? So probably they're going to start their day filling out paperwork with HR or filling out whatever other paperwork. Here's your direct deposit information. Here's your emergency contact information. Here's your email login. Here's all your general setup stuff. Here's the people you need to talk to. It's also really nice to give people an easy win. Something that lets them show off their skills. Here's a quick little project you can do this week. You can have ownership over it. And that's a nice thing to let people feel comfortable. Who are the most important people for a new hire to get to know, right? Is it all of the individual team members? Is it anybody else in the organization? Are you at one of those organizations where you walk somebody around and you introduce them to 40 people on the first day in their cubicles and they immediately forget all of those people? Maybe don't do that. The other thing to think about is as you're onboarding somebody, as you're getting them settled into your organization, how are you accounting for things like neurodiversity, accessibility needs, the different pieces, whether or not somebody is an introvert or an extrovert? How do you give them some time to not have that information overload that we've all experienced when you start a new job? Starting a new job fries your brain. So what are some ways that you can ease somebody in slowly and give them support? And then on the flip side, if they have a new manager or a manager who has a lot on their plate, how are you supporting the manager so that they have the time to onboard? And if the person who is in charge of onboarding has an emergency and has to suddenly be out in the middle of that process, who will pick up and take the reins on that? So make sure there's always two people who have, even if they're not both involved, a second person should know what the plan is as a backup and kind of what the outline is, or where to find that documentation. A friend of mine was just out for almost a month in the middle of a new onboarding thing because she went into labor early, had some complications. So she was out for a full month and her company was like, but we're in the middle of onboarding. She was like, great, but I'm in the ICU. I'm not helping you with this. I have objectively more pressing concerns. Don't be that organization. So, too long, don't read hiring. Everyone should agree. Please, dear God, communicate. That's the single biggest thing. Communication. Following the same process for all candidates, that gives you that data. You actually know who gave the best answer because you ask the same questions. Prep everything in advance. If you are asking, and then kind of in that following the same process and making sure everyone agrees, if you are asking specific questions about somebody's resume, hey, I'll use RMFI as an example because I know more about how they work than banks. Hey, we see that you used to work for Energize Colorado in their small business support program. Tell us a little bit about what you did with them and how you liked it and what attracts you to RMFI as opposed to EC, whatever. Everybody in the room should know why you're asking that question. What is the information you're hoping to get out of it? Every single question should have a set of information you're hoping to get out of it. So, and if you aren't sure, then don't ask that question. This QR code will give you a free guide on hiring. It has most of this information. It also has checklists and a calendar in it for doing what you need when you need to do it. It's a nice little organizational tool. We also have this bookshop for general business books on those pieces. I'm on LinkedIn. Our career garage is my company. Should be the last slide.
Yeah, just sort of a very specific
Yeah.
question about the last piece of it. Do you ask the same questions of every candidate?
Yes.
And based on the criteria that you need to complete the
Yes.
success of this job?
Yes. The only deviation from that is the interview specific or the resume specific ones.
Yeah.
Right.
Or the follow on to their initial answer. You can do.
Right. If you need like a clarifying thing.
Yeah.
But even those clarifying questions that you might want to ask,
We're trying to get to that why you're asking this.
yeah, you want them to be back to that why. So you might even brainstorm those in advance. Here are the questions we might ask as follow-up to make sure we got that answer. And some of that is for your ability to consistently evaluate candidates. If you have two separate questions,
Yeah.
you can't evaluate the answers because you didn't give them the same setup. But also a lot of that is that just general equal opportunity.
Yeah, I tell hiring managers that a lot, and they're like, "Well, I think you ask the same questions of everybody because every candidate's different." And I'm like,
Yeah, but
the job is the same,
Right.
Right.
And exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is, and that goes back to that why.
Objectively get to
What are you trying to get out of it?
Yeah.
Right. And so being really realistic about that. And so instead of saying, what did you like about working for this other bank? You can say, tell me about what attracts you to working at Alpine. Right. So those open-ended reframing it of why are you asking this question? What is the information you're hoping to get?
There was a bullet point around sending the interview questions beforehand. Do you have a recommendation around like how early you should send them? Like,
Whenever you have scheduling confirmation, I would
so
send
like days, like weeks before?
Yes, absolutely. I would say because theoretically you planned all these interview questions, when you planned that hiring, you made that initial hiring plan. So you have all that information. So you're just executing. So when you say, great, we'll see you Tuesday at 10 a.m. at the Mariposa office. Here are some ways to get there via public transportation. Here's what parking looks like. Here's what to do when you walk in the building. And here's a copy of the interview questions if you want to prepare. And you don't have to send them all of them. Like you can send them most and then be like, oh yeah, here's like this one, or you don't necessarily have to send them the resume specific ones, or, you know, if there are places in the job where they might have to think on the spot, great, have 1 or 2 questions they have to answer on the spot. But by and large, most jobs do not require somebody to immediately know a thing off the top of their head without any resources in a high stress situation. So that's what I would do, is I would just include it with all your other, hey, here's your interview confirmation email with all the information you need. Any other questions? All right, well, there we go.
Well, thank you, Jessi.
Thank you, Jessi.